I set the envelope on the table beside the breadbasket and walked out of the banquet hall without saying a word to anyone. The parking lot was cold, the way only an October evening in Ontario can be, that specific kind of damp that gets into your collar and stays there. I stood under a streetlight for a moment. There was a man sitting on a folded piece of cardboard near the entrance to the strip mall next door. He had a paper coffee cup in front of him, and he was watching the cars go by, with the patient expression of someone who has learned that patience is the only currency he has left. I walked over and handed him the gift bag I'd been carrying all afternoon. He looked up at me. "There's a card inside," I said, "and something else. Don't throw it away." He nodded. He didn't ask questions. I respected that. Then I got in my truck and drove home. Let me back up. Because what happened that afternoon didn't start at that banquet hall. It started 23 years ago, in a hospital waiting room in Sudbury, when I held a newborn girl and knew, in the way you sometimes just know things, that I was going to love her for the rest of my life, whether she ever called me anything or not. My daughter was 22 when she had her. I was 51. A grandfather at 51. I remember my wife squeezing my arm in that hallway and saying, "Well, you're going to have to stop pretending to be old now." She laughed. I laughed. We hadn't laughed that easily in years, if I'm honest. But that day we did. My daughter was not in a good situation. The man she'd been with had left before the baby was 3 months old. No forwarding address, no phone number that worked, nothing. Just a pile of debt she didn't fully understand yet, and a one-bedroom apartment in a building that smelled like damp carpet and fried food. We helped. That's what you do. My wife and I drove down from our place north of Barrie, almost every weekend for the first 2 years. We paid for the crib. We paid for the first round of daycare when my daughter went back to work. We didn't talk about the money because that's not why we did it. We did it because that baby was ours, in the way that grandchildren are yours, through love rather than biology, which is just as binding. My granddaughter's name is Abigail, Abby. She had my wife's eyes and my daughter's stubbornness, and as far as I could tell, an entirely original personality that belonged to no one but herself. She used to fall asleep on my chest when she was small, and I would just sit there and not move and not turn on the television, just sit there listening to her breathe, and I thought, this is it. This is what the whole thing is for. I should tell you about my son-in-law. My daughter met him when Abby was 4. He was working in insurance, recently divorced, no kids of his own. He was pleasant enough when we first met him, a little stiff. The kind of man who shakes hands firmly on purpose. He had opinions about wine that he shared without being asked, and he drove a truck that was newer and larger than any practical need could justify. And I filed those things away in the back of my mind and didn't say anything, because my daughter was happy and Abby seemed to like him. They married 2 years later. Small ceremony in Barrie. My wife and I paid for the flowers and the dinner, which my son-in-law accepted with a handshake and a comment about how much things cost these days. After they married, things shifted. Not suddenly. Gradually, the way water changes temperature. You don't notice it until you're cold. We started being called less often. Weekend visits became monthly visits, then occasional visits. Then we were expected to announce ourselves 2 weeks in advance because they had a schedule. My son-in-law had opinions about grandparents' involvement that he also shared without being asked. Something about children needing consistency. Something about not wanting Abby to be spoiled. I listened to this across the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, while my daughter looked at her coffee cup and said nothing. And I thought about all the weekends I'd driven down from north of Barrie, and I kept my mouth shut. My wife got sick in 2019. Pancreatic. She was gone before Christmas of that year. I will not dwell on that here, except to say that grief at 68 is a different animal than grief at younger ages. It's quieter. It takes up more space. You don't cry at a funeral and feel better. You just carry it forward from that point on. And the carrying is the thing. My daughter came to the funeral. My son-in-law came. Abby came. She was 17 by then, and she held my hand outside the church and didn't say anything, and that was exactly right. After that, the visits became even less frequent. My son-in-law, I noticed, was very good at managing the distance between people without ever saying anything that could be called unkind. Nothing he said was cruel. It was just the schedule was full, the drive was long. Abby had exams. Always something that was technically true and technically reasonable and left no room for argument. I started keeping receipts, not out of resentment. I want to be clear about that. I kept receipts because my wife had always been the one who handled those things. The thank you cards, the remembering who needed what, the keeping track. Without her, I had to make a system. So I made a system. I kept a log in a notebook I bought at Shoppers Drug Mart. Every time I transferred money for Abby's university fund, I wrote it down. Every time I contributed to her RSIP, which I'd opened when she was 6 months old, long before her stepfather was in the picture, I wrote down the date, the amount, the running total. I wasn't doing it to hold it over anyone. I was doing it because my wife would have done it, and because I missed her, and because keeping track of the things I'd done for Abby was a way of holding on to something that felt like it was slowly being managed away from me. By the time Abby was 23, the RSIP had been used up for her nursing degree. The nursing degree was done. She'd graduated from Laurentian, come back to the Barrie area, taken a job at the regional hospital. Good job, steady, and she'd met someone. A young man from Timmins whose father was a retired school teacher and whose mother ran a small alteration shop. His name was Mitchell. He was quiet, steady, and looked at Abby the way people used to look at things they meant to keep. When she called to tell me they were engaged, I cried. I did. I was alone in my house north of Barrie, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I cried in a way I hadn't since the funeral. And then I washed my face and called her back, and told her I thought Mitchell was a fine man and I was very happy. The wedding was set for the following October, Muskoka, a lodge they'd rented for the weekend, the kind of place that's all pine and fieldstone, and looks like it came out of a Canadian Living magazine. Beautiful. My daughter and my son-in-law were paying for most of it. I offered to contribute and was told politely, in the way my son-in-law does things, that they had it handled. I asked what I could do. Just come and enjoy yourself, Dad, my daughter said. So I came. I drove down from Barrie on the Saturday afternoon. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock on the lake shore. Chairs set up on a wooden platform with the trees behind them, the water going gray and silver in the October light. It was cold. Everyone had a blanket on their lap. Abby came down the aisle on my son-in-law's arm, her stepfather's arm, and I was seated in the third row. And I watched, and I kept my hands folded in my lap and my face composed. And I thought, this is fine. This is how things are now. This is the shape of it. The reception was inside. Long tables, candles. A band that played classic rock too quietly to dance to. I was placed at a table near the back with Mitchell's relatives, 3 of his cousins from Timmins, and an aunt who had driven down from Kirkland Lake, and who turned out to be excellent company. She'd been a nurse herself decades ago, and she and I talked about the hospital system for most of the first course. The table near the front, nearest the head table, nearest the dance floor, was my daughter and my son-in-law's table. Their friends, my daughter's sisters from her stepfather's side, his business colleagues. I had not been placed at that table. I noticed this. I didn't say anything about it. When the gift portion of the evening came, people brought their envelopes and boxes forward to a table near the head table. I went up with mine when it was appropriate. It was not a box. It was a plain kraft envelope, the kind you get at Staples, sealed with a clasp. My daughter was standing beside the gift table when I set it down. She looked at the envelope. Then she looked at me. "That's it," she said, not quietly. I said yes. "Dad." She picked it up, gave it a small shake. You couldn't feel anything inside it, or very little. "Did you put a card in something else? Is there another bag?" I said no. She set it back down. Her husband appeared at her shoulder. He has a way of appearing at her shoulder. And she turned to him and I heard her say, He brought a paper envelope. Look at it. It doesn't even feel like there's anything in it. He looked at the envelope, then at me. These things add up, Ron, he said. He smiled when he said it. That's the thing about him. He always smiles. My name is Ronald. My wife called me Ron. Most people call me Ronald. I know what things cost, I said. I kept my voice level. I am 68 years old, and I have had 30 years of practice in keeping my voice level. My daughter picked up the envelope again, and I watched her pull the clasp open and reach inside. She pulled out a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, unfolded it, looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, somewhere between embarrassment and something harder. This is a photocopy of a bank statement, she said. It's a printout from online banking, I said. Same thing, Dad. You brought a printout of a bank account to a wedding. Look at the name on the account, I said. She looked. It's Abby's name. And what's the balance? She looked at it again. She didn't read the number out loud. What does this mean? She said. It means what it looks like, I said. Abby and I, and your mother, before she passed. We've been putting money into that account since she was 6 months old. That's the running balance. I'm transferring the account to her name this week. Full control, no conditions. It's a gift to Abby, from me and from her grandmother. I didn't wait for anyone to say anything. I went back to my table. I sat down with Mitchell's aunt from Kirkland Lake, and she was telling a story about a physician she'd worked with 40 years ago who used to bring his dog to the hospital on slow nights. And I listened and I laughed in the right places, and I drank my water, and I did not look at the front of the room. But I heard it. About 15 minutes after I sat down, my daughter raised her voice. It was directed at my son-in-law, I think, not at the room in general, but the acoustics in that room were unforgiving. I couldn't make out every word, but I made out embarrassing and in front of everyone and should have said something before. Then I heard my son-in-law's voice, lower but carrying. Something about how this kind of thing. And here I heard my name. This kind of gesture was exactly the problem, making it about himself instead of about Abby. I sat still. Mitchell's aunt had gone quiet. She looked at me with the kind of calm expression that only people who have spent long careers in medical environments can produce, a face that holds space for whatever is happening without adding to it. How much? She asked me quietly. 47,000, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Your wife helped build that? Every year until she couldn't anymore. She nodded. She picked up her wine glass. Well, she said, I imagine the room is about to get interesting. It didn't get interesting right away. There were speeches. There was cake. There was dancing after 10. And I sat with my water and watched Abby dance with Mitchell, and with her mother, and with my son-in-law. And I thought about a Saturday afternoon in a hospital waiting room in Sudbury in 2001. And I thought about a small body on my chest, not moving. And I thought about my wife's hand on my arm. I had wrapped the document in a second sheet of paper, behind the bank statement. A letter, handwritten, that I had written over 3 evenings the week before the wedding. Not addressed to my daughter, not addressed to my son-in-law, addressed to Abby. I had written about her grandmother, what she was like, the specific things, the way she read the newspaper with a red pen to circle words she wanted to look up later, the way she kept a pair of reading glasses in every room of the house, the way she would stand at the kitchen window in the morning and talk out loud about what the weather was doing, like she was reporting it to someone. The way she had driven to Sudbury the night Abby was born. In January, on icy roads, because she couldn't wait until morning. I wrote about what we'd hoped for, not in a heavy way, just in a true way, that we'd hoped she'd have a life that was stable and loving, and that allowed her to be who she was, and that it looked very much like she was building exactly that. I told her the account was hers and that there were no conditions attached to it, and that her grandmother would have been sitting in the front row if she could have been. Then I signed it. With all my love, Grandpa Ronald. I didn't know if Abby had read the letter yet. I didn't know what she'd been told about the envelope, or if my daughter had said anything to her. I hadn't spoken to Abby since the ceremony, beyond a hug and a "you look beautiful" in the receiving line. Around 9:30, I decided to step outside. The main floor had a back door that led to a wooden deck overlooking the lake. I stood out there in the dark with my coat on and watched the water. The moon was doing something to the surface of the lake that it does this time of year. That flat silver-gray shimmer that you get when the sky is overcast and the light diffuses. It's not a dramatic view, it's a quiet one. I'd been out there maybe 10 minutes when the door opened behind me. It was Abby, still in her dress, with a cardigan thrown over her shoulders, holding a small white envelope. She didn't say anything for a moment. She came and stood beside me at the railing. "I didn't know about the resp," she said. "I knew you helped when I was little. Mom told me you and Grandma used to drive down all the time. But I didn't know about the account. I didn't know you'd kept it going this long. We didn't talk about it," I said. "We didn't see the point in talking about it." She was quiet for a while. The band was audible through the wall, something mid-tempo and low. "I read the letter," she said. I nodded. "I didn't know she circled words in the newspaper," she said. Her voice had gone slightly uneven. "I don't remember that." "You were too young to notice," I said. "But she did it every day." Abby pressed her lips together. She was holding herself together with that particular effort that people make in public, when they don't want to cry and they're almost losing the fight. "She would have loved today," I said. "She would have found something to boss around and some person to adopt. And she would have danced at least twice with Mitchell, even if he didn't want to. And she would have driven me absolutely crazy with how happy she was." Abby laughed at that. A real laugh, the unexpected kind, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. Then she put her arms around me and held on, and I held on back. And we stood there on that deck in the October cold, with the lake going silver below us, and I thought of my wife again. But not with sadness this time, or not only with sadness, with something else. Some feeling I don't have a precise word for, which is the feeling of knowing that what you built together is still standing. "Mitchell's aunt told me something," Abby said when she stepped back. She was wiping one eye with the back of her hand. "She talks a lot," I said. "She said you told her the number." Abby smiled. 47,000. I shouldn't have said that out loud. "No," she said. "I'm glad you did." She paused. "That's, Grandpa, that's almost a down payment, or it's a safety net," I said. "Whichever you need it to be." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she nodded, the way people nod when they understand something that goes beyond what's been said. The door opened again. My son-in-law. He stepped out onto the deck, took in the scene. Me, Abby, whatever was written on her face, and his expression went through a quick adjustment that I recognized. "They're doing the bouquet toss," he said to Abby. "I'll be right in," she said. He looked at me. "Ronald." A pause. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding earlier." "About the gift." "No misunderstanding," I said pleasantly. He looked at Abby again. She looked back at him without changing her expression. "It's a very generous gift," he said to me. He said it the way people say things when they're recalibrating. "It's from me and from Abby's grandmother," I said. "I just held on to it until the right time." He nodded. He held the door. Abby squeezed my arm and went inside. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer. "You could have told us," he said. "We would have appreciated knowing." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. He went inside. I stood on the deck for another few minutes. The water was still doing that thing with the moonlight. Somewhere across the lake there was a loon calling. Late in the season for that. But there it was, one long carrying note and then silence. Then I went back inside and finished my evening. I'll tell you about the envelope. The gift table, when I found it before leaving, had been organized neatly. Cards stacked, boxes off to one side. My original envelope was sitting at the back. The bank statement was still in it. But the letter, the handwritten one, the one addressed to Abby, was gone. I asked a member of the catering staff, a young woman who'd been clearing the gift table. She looked uncertain for a moment. Then she said, "Someone took one of the papers out earlier. A lady. She folded it up and put it in her bag. My daughter." I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about it for several days, actually. What it meant, whether she'd read it, whether she'd kept it or thrown it away, whether something in it had landed somewhere. 3 weeks after the wedding, my daughter called me, late on a Sunday afternoon. The kids were out, she said. She was alone. She said she'd read the letter. She said she'd read it several times. She didn't say she was sorry, exactly. What she said was, "I didn't know how much she talked to you about us. I don't know what I thought. I guess I thought we'd all kind of moved forward separately after she died. I said that grief didn't always move people forward. Sometimes it just moved them alongside each other, and you didn't always know who was walking next to you until you looked." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, I want to see you more." And I said, "I'd like that too." That was 6 months ago. She comes north every few weeks now, sometimes with Abby, sometimes alone. My son-in-law comes occasionally. He's polite. He's always been polite. I think we understand each other now in a way that's more honest than before, which isn't warmth exactly, but it's something true, and I'll take something true. Abby and Mitchell came for Christmas. We made a turkey and put up a tree, and Abby found her grandmother's old box of ornaments in the storage room, and we hung every one of them, even the broken ones, even the ones with no hooks left that we had to balance on branches. Mitchell figured out a system with twist ties from the kitchen drawer. We stood back and looked at it when it was done. "It looks sort of deranged," Abby said. "It looks perfect," I said, and it did. There's a thing I keep coming back to when I think about that wedding evening. Not my son-in-law on the deck. Not my daughter at the gift table. It's the man outside the strip mall, sitting on the cardboard. He'd looked inside the gift bag. I'd given him the whole bag, the envelope, everything, before I understood that I was going to walk back inside and give Abby the document directly. When I came back to him 5 minutes later and explained the situation, he handed it back without a second's hesitation. He said, it looked like something important. He said I wasn't going to touch it. I thanked him. I gave him $60, which was all the cash I had in my wallet, and he accepted it with a nod and no performance about it. I went back inside and I put the envelope on the gift table and I went back to my seat, and the rest of the night happened the way I've told you. But I think about him, how he sat there in the October cold all evening while the cars came and went, and the wedding guests walked past him in their good clothes. And he held on to something that wasn't his because he could tell it mattered. How he didn't need to know what was inside, to know that it should be returned. My wife would have gone back out and talked to him. She would have found out his name and his situation, and she would have slipped him another $40 when I wasn't looking. She would have probably brought him a piece of cake. I've driven by that strip mall a few times since. He hasn't been there. I don't know where he is. I hope he's somewhere warmer. What I know is that the most decent moment of that entire evening belonged to a stranger on a piece of cardboard, and I have not forgotten that, and I don't intend to. That's the whole of it, or near enough. You hold on to what you've built. You keep going. You let the truth do what it does. My wife was right about one thing that day in the hospital 23 years ago. I did have to stop pretending to be old. I'm still working on it.